Hello and welcome to our channel. In this video, we're going to explain what empiricism is. What is empiricism? Empiricism is a theory of knowledge that asserts that knowledge comes from experience. So, it is basically associated with the idea that we are born as a blank slate or tabula rasa in Latin, and we gain knowledge through our senses and experiences in the world. Empiricism is one of the major epistemological theories or theories of knowledge that has influenced Western philosophy since the time of ancient Greece, and it stands in contrast to rationalism, which emphasizes the role of reason in acquiring knowledge. There are several key ideas that are central to empiricism. The first one is that all knowledge comes from sense experience. So, empiricists believe that the mind is a passive recipient of information and that all knowledge is ultimately based on sensory experiences like seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and so on. It is also closely related to the idea that the source of knowledge is experience, which means that empiricists generally reject the idea that we can have knowledge of things that we have not experienced. For example, an empiricist might argue that we cannot know what it is like to be a Martian because we have never had any experiences of being a Martian. However, empiricists have different views on what counts as experience. Some empiricists restrict experience to sensory experience, while others allow for a broader conception of experience that includes things like introspection or the experience of having mental states. We'll talk more about this later on. The second key idea in empiricism is that our minds are like a blank slate at birth. In other words, we are born without any innate knowledge or ideas. This idea is usually referred to as the doctrine of the blank slate, or in Latin, tabula rasa. This idea was famously defended by the 17th century English philosopher John Locke, who argued that at birth our minds are indeed a blank slate. He says that all the knowledge we have when we are born is basically just the ability to perceive things through our senses. And then we acquire knowledge through our experiences, and these experiences cause our minds to make associations. As he says in his essay concerning human understanding, the mind is indeed a blank slate. It has no characters traced on it. It is without any ideas. What fills it, what it has, or whatever it thinks, comes only by sensation and reflection. However, not all empiricists endorse the doctrine of the blank slate. For example, the Scottish philosopher David Hume thought that we do have some innate knowledge, but he still held an empiricist view according to which most of our knowledge comes from our experiences. We'll talk more about him later on. The third idea that is central to empiricism is that all complex ideas can be reduced to simple ideas or sensations. So, the idea here is that our experiences give us these simple ideas or sensations, and then we combine these simple ideas to form more complex ideas. For example, if we see a dog for the first time, we might experience a simple idea of a furry four-legged animal that barks. And then we might combine that with other experiences to form a more complex idea of what a dog is. This idea is often referred to as the idea of simple ideas. John Locke, again, is the one who defends this idea, and he argues that the only kind of knowledge we have at birth is that of sensation. And these simple ideas of sensation are then building blocks for all other knowledge. However, this idea has been heavily criticized by other philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein, who pointed out that the idea of simple ideas is actually pretty problematic because if we really think about it, there is nothing simple about simple ideas. The fourth idea that is central to empiricism is the idea of justification. So, empiricists want to explain how we can be justified in believing that something is true. Like, how does it make sense to say that the sun will rise tomorrow? How can we be justified in making that claim? And empiricists answer this question by appealing to our experiences and our memories. So, they say that we have experiences that support our beliefs and we remember those experiences, and then that memory justifies our belief that the sun will rise tomorrow. The idea here is that we base our beliefs on evidence and we get that evidence from our experiences. Empiricism has had a huge impact on the development of Western philosophy and science. And the idea of justification, in particular, has been very influential in the development of epistemology, or the study of knowledge. Many empiricists think that this idea of justification is really what distinguishes knowledge from mere belief. Knowledge is basically justified true belief. So, if we want to say that someone knows something, we need to be able to say that their belief is justified by evidence. Now, even though empiricism has had a huge impact on philosophy, there are also many criticisms that have been raised against it. One of the most famous criticisms of empiricism is the criticism that it doesn't tell us how we can be sure that our senses are reliable. If we take empiricism seriously, then it seems we need to assume that our senses are reliable. But how can we be justified in assuming that? If we appeal to experience again, then it seems we are just assuming that our senses are reliable in our experience. And that doesn't seem right. This problem was pointed out by the 17th century French philosopher René Descartes, who was a rationalist, as we said, and he thought that rationalism was the correct theory of knowledge. Descartes also pointed out another problem with empiricism, namely that we seem to be able to know things that we have never experienced. For example, we seem to know that other people exist independently of our experiences of them. Empiricists have offered various responses to these criticisms, but they remain influential objections to empiricism. So, empiricism isn't a unified theory, and there are many different kinds of empiricism. Let's now talk about some of the most important empiricists. The first one is Aristotle, who is considered to be the first empiricist because he emphasized the importance of observation and experience in acquiring knowledge. However, Aristotle wasn't a full-fledged empiricist because he didn't reject the idea that we have innate knowledge. He believed that we have some innate knowledge about basic categories like substance, quantity, time, place, and other similar concepts. John Locke is another important empiricist who defended the idea that our minds are a blank slate at birth. As we talked about earlier, he thought that all knowledge comes from experience and that we are born with only the ability to sense things and nothing else. The next one is David Hume, who is probably the most famous empiricist. Hume agreed with Locke that all knowledge comes from experience. However, he rejected the idea that we are born as a blank slate. He thought that we have some innate knowledge, although he didn't think that this knowledge is very extensive. Hume also made important contributions to the idea of justification, as we talked about earlier. He thought that our beliefs are justified if they are based on sufficient experience. The last empiricist we're going to talk about is Karl Popper, who was a 20th century philosopher. Popper was actually not an empiricist himself, but he is often grouped together with empiricists because he shared some of their views. For example, he agreed with empiricists that all knowledge comes from experience. However, he rejected the idea that we can have knowledge of things that we have not experienced. He thought that we can only have knowledge of things that we have directly or indirectly observed. If you want to learn more about the history of philosophy, check out our videos on the History of Philosophy playlist. And if you want to learn more about other major theories of knowledge, check out our video on rationalism. Thank you for watching and see you next time.